the role of prophetic guidance, because when you look at the history of redemption, whenever God leads out in a major movement, there's always prophetic guidance involved, with the exception of the Protestant Reformation, which may or may not have seen that. But when you look at the Exodus, there was a prophet that led out. When you look at the conquest of Canaan, there was a prophet that led. When you look at the establishment of Israel, Samuel was there to offer prophetic guidance. When you look at the monarchy being established, which wasn't plan A for God, but there was a prophet to guide in that process. And when you look at Jesus coming, there was a prophet, John the Baptist, that prepared the way. And when you look at the apostolic church, the prophetic gift was active, guiding the church. And then, of course, the remnant church, the Advent movement, we have the prophetic gift too. So, the gift of prophecy has been continually active in the history of God's people, and that might be something to look at some point. Yeah, but I like Hebrews. I'm okay. I mean, you guys can tell me what you want to do, but I'm okay with starting with Hebrews if you want to start with that book. But Robert,
if we're starting a study on the sanctuary, I say include Hebrews, but let's look at Exodus and Leviticus.
Yeah. Well, I think we can tie in some of those passages, certainly. Yeah.
Because they are all about sanctuary.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so what's your pleasure? We'll go pure Athens right now, and it's a straight democracy. What do you think? You guys okay with Hebrews? And then we'll be careful to consider Robert's thought of bringing in some of these other texts and concepts, because certainly Exodus and Leviticus, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, or at least Exodus through Deuteronomy, talk about that. Okay? All right, so in preparation for next week, if you could just sniff through Hebrews 1 and maybe just reacclimate yourself with some of the sanctuary themes in the Old Testament, and we'll jump right in. All right, so I've got an outline, and this is the final outline for Revelation. There's also a quiz, which I didn't make very difficult, so thank you. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. And this was basically on what we covered last week. What I'd like to do tonight is I just want to do a final review of an overview of Revelation and the parallelisms that are there, and then answer any questions you may have that might be final questions on this, and then we can wrap this up. And keep in mind that when we do our evangelistic series this fall, we're going to use the same format we did the last 2 meetings, with the round tables, with the meal each night, and we're going to do a verse-by-verse study through the book of Revelation. So it won't be your typical evangelistic meeting where you go over the doctrines of the Bible as well as the prophecies that tie in the doctrines like we normally do. This will be just a verse-by-verse right through. Of course, it'll be a little more abbreviated because of the venue than it would be here, because we have more time to go in depth here, whereas there it's going to be more of a survey type. Okay. I'm always looking for ways to simplify, and maybe this isn't simplifying it, but I like looking at, when you look at the big picture of things, it's really neat to look at patterns, because it helps you to see the big picture a little more clearly. Okay? Now, when you look at this pyramid, you can see at the top of the pyramid is Revelation 14, 1 through 20, which is a description of the everlasting gospel, the 3 angels' messages, which I feel is the apex of the book, because it's the gospel message going to all the world. In that chapter, you have the 144,000, and then you have the second advent. So you have, again, this special message given by a special people for a special time. So this is kind of the top of this structure of Revelation. And when you look at these side tiers, you see some parallels. Like you see point A here is the first chapter in Revelation. This is an introduction to the book, and this is a description of Jesus. And this parallels Revelation 22, 6 to 21, which is the conclusion, not the introduction, but it also ends with an appeal from Jesus to get ready because He's coming quickly. So you see a parallel there. Then you see, in point B here, you see Revelation 2, verse 1 to 3:22, which is the 7 churches, each of which make a promise to the overcomer, right? And that parallels Revelation 21, verse 1 to 22:5, which discusses the new heaven and the new earth, which is the actual reward for the overcomer. Right? So you see a parallel there. Then when you go up to point C, you see Revelation 4, verse 1 to 5:14. This is a description of the heavenly sanctuary where Christ is enthroned because His sacrifice is accepted at His ascension. And then the Holy Spirit's poured out, right? Well, this parallels Revelation 20, verses 7 to 15, which describes the second death. But in that, Christ is enthroned on a great white throne. You know, because He's lifted up on this great white throne and conducts this final judgment of the unsaved. So both of these discuss an enthronement of Christ, which I think is interesting. Then letter D here, Revelation 6:1 to 8:1, this describes the 7 seals. And in the midst of the 7 seals, under the 5th seal, there's a prayer by the martyrs. Lord, how long will it be before you avenge us? Before you bring justice to those that have put us to death, right? Well, this parallels Revelation 21 to 6, which discusses the millennium in which the judgment of the unsaved takes place. So how long, Lord, will it take before you avenge? Well, during the millennium, judgment will go against the unsaved, which would include those that have put God's people to death. All right? So you see a little bit of a parallel there. Then you see Revelation 8, verse 2 to 11, verse 19. You see the 7 trumpets, which are judgments against the enemies of the gospel. And then you see a parallel here to Revelation 19, 11 to 21, which is Christ's return. By the way, He comes with a trumpet, and He executes judgment against the enemies of the gospel when He comes. Right? So you see a parallel there. All right, let me catch my breath for a second. All right. Now, letter F, Revelation 12, 1 to 17. This is a description of God's true church, and that parallels Revelation 17, 1 to 19, 10, which talks about Babylon, which is the false church. So you see a parallels, true church, false church. Then, G, you see Revelation 13, 1 to 18, which describes 2 anti-Christian empires, the papacy and the United States. And that parallels the 7 last plagues, Revelation 15, 1 to 16, verse 21. And the 7 last plagues will be given to all the followers of these 2 powers that receive the mark of the beast. So you see a parallel there. 7 last plagues will be given to those that follow those 2 systems at the end of time. And then, of course, the apex is the gospel of Revelation 14. So you see here, beginning in Revelation 1, you climb up every verse, every section through to 14, and then down through 15, 16, 17, 18, all the way down to 22. So you see some parallels there. It's kind of interesting how you can see the big picture there. All right. Now, another thing that I think is very interesting is that there's 7 blessings in Revelation. Okay? Now, I'm sure these blessings apply to people of all generations, but I believe that there's a special application of these 7 blessings to God's end-time faithful. In Revelation 1, verse 3, blessed are they that read, that hear, and keep the words of this prophecy. The time is near, the time is at hand. There's a special blessing in this generation to be had if we study, hear, and follow what Revelation's exhortations are in terms of faithfulness, right? Now, the second blessing is in Revelation 14:13, and that is the blessed dead who die in the faith of the third angel's message. Those that have faith in the third angel's message, the commandments of God, and the faith of Jesus, if they die having faith in that message, guess what? They're going to experience a special resurrection, right? Then you have Revelation 16:15, where this is in context with the Battle of Armageddon. Jesus says, "Behold, I come quickly. Blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame." So there's a blessing on those that watch and keep their garments, which means they guard their character. They're developing their character. They're living by faith in the righteousness of Christ, this garment of salvation, as they prepare for Armageddon, which is a last day battle. right? Then you have Revelation 19, verse 9, which is a blessing on those who are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb. That's that great celebration, if you will, when Jesus comes of all. Verse 6, there's a blessing on those that have part in the first resurrection, which is the resurrection of the faithful when Jesus comes, right? Second death has no power on them because they're saved, and the second death is only for the unsaved, right? Then you have Revelation 22, verse 7, blessed are those that keep the sayings of the prophecy of this. Those that keep what the book of Revelation says and seek to follow are going to be blessed. And then finally in Revelation 22:14, if you read the King James and the New King James, blessed are those who keep His commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life and may enter in through the gates into the city. There's a blessing pronounced upon those who keep the commandments of God. So these 7 blessings are very appropriate for our generation, especially for God's end-time remnant church, right? So let's not forget those 7 blessings because they're woven in throughout this great vision of Revelation, and they're promises to those that overcome, right? All right, so any thoughts, questions, ideas? Or should we just jump right into Hebrews 1 right now? I'm just kidding. Now, keep in mind with these verses, the way they're divided up, you could further divide these texts. I mean, underneath each one, you could divide up passages. Like, for example, seal number 1, seal number 2, seal number 3. You know, you could further subdivide these verses into sections to further explain what these block passages are talking about. But I think that's, in my opinion, that helps me to understand the big picture of Revelation a little bit, you know, in terms of the parallels that are there. What do you think? All right, well, let's have closing prayer, and we're done now. I'm kidding. You guys want to do the quiz real quick? Maybe that'll jar your memory? Okay. Man, I almost wish I had some more stuff to present. I didn't. All right, let's look at the quiz here. And I just want to let you know that I was kind of wrestling with what questions to ask on this, so don't laugh at me too hard when you see these questions, all right? All right. So number 1, the passing away of the first heaven in Revelation 21:1 most likely means, A, God will get rid of the third paradise after moving His throne to the new earth. B, God will get rid of outer space after moving His throne to the new earth. C, God will cleanse and recreate the earth's atmosphere after sin is destroyed. D, all of the above. E, none of the above. No one wants to say the answer. C, that's right. I think when he talks about the first heaven and the first, I think it's talking about the firmament of earth. And remember, prior to sin and prior to the flood, actually, there was a water firmament. And there's a good possibility that maybe God's going to recreate that the way it was prior to sin and cleanse the atmosphere. All right. Number 2, the phrase "there was no more sea" in Revelation 21:1 most likely means A, there will be no water sources on the new earth. B, there will be no vast oceans separating land masses on the new earth. C, there will be no separation of different geographic nations on the new earth. D, all of the above, or E, none of the above? B, that is correct. When it says no more sea, obviously there'll be water on the new earth because we know the river of life will be there, right? But there'll be no vast oceans separating these large land masses to keep people separate. We'll all be dwelling together, and there won't be anything to keep us apart. Yes, Robert.
Every time I read "no more sea," I think about John.
Yeah, he was isolated, wasn't he?
He's isolated by the sea.
Right.
From the work that he really wants to do. He wants to be with his people.
Yes, in person, ministering. Yeah.
And
that must have meant something to him.
no wonder he mentioned it.
Yeah, exactly. And and you think of like the creatures, like giant whales and things like that. I would like to think that there'll be water enough on the new earth to have those creatures. I would think.
Well, the creation account says that there were whales.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. Yeah. Very good.
And the neat thing about it, you can hang on to the door.
Yeah. Safely. Yeah, exactly. All right, number 3, the bride in Revelation 21:2 is, pay attention now, all right? A, the holy city, which is the New Jerusalem. B, made up of the redeemed who are citizens of the New Jerusalem. C, the Lamb's wife in a spiritual sense. D, was that too much of a hint? All of the above. E, none of the above. All right, you guys got it. I think all of those are basically saying the same thing. It's the literal city, but it's also the bride is also the church who are citizens of that city. So, the bride is both the city and those that have right to that city, I think. All right, 4. The New Jerusalem of Revelation 21:10 through 27. A, is as wide and high as it is long, a perfect square. B, has 12 gates of pearl, 3 in each of the 4 directions, each named after an Israelite tribe. C, has 12 foundations, each adorned with a gemstone and named after the 12 apostles. D, has a wall 144 cubits high around it, which is approximately 216 feet high. Or E, all of the above. That's an easy one, right? Okay.
Donald Trump would like D.
Yeah, that's right. He would, wouldn't he?
Actually, D is very interesting to me also, because if this city truly is a cube 375 miles on the side, what good is a 200-foot?
Yeah, I don't, yeah. You kind of wonder, why a wall,
Well,
I guess you'll have to
I
wait
look
till you
forward
get there to find out
I look forward to seeing it.
Well, the good thing is the gates will never be shut.
Yeah, 'cause it's
That's the good thing.
I have to wonder how big the pearls are, too.
That's right, yeah.
But,
Interesting, yeah. All right, number 5. The nations of the saved in Revelation 21:24 are most likely, A, all of redeemed humanity from the various nations of Earth's history. B, redeemed humanity divided into the 12 Israelite tribes, each of which are nations. C, probably should have, instead of saying all of the above, I should have just said A and B. Or D, none of the above. What do you think?
C.
I think it's C, yeah. I think the nations of the saved are the people from the different nations in this life, but I also think we'll be divided into nations in that world, and each tribe of Israel is a nation. Will be divided among the 12 tribes, I think. All right, 6. The kings of the earth in Revelation 21:24 are most likely, A, a description of redeemed humanity who are priests and kings for God. B, a hierarchy of redeemed leaders over the various groups of redeemed humanity. C, angelic beings who serve as leaders over the various groups of redeemed humanity. Or D, none of the above. Well, first of all, do you think it's C?
No.
Okay, so you can eliminate C. So it's either A or B. What do you think?
A.
That's right. I think it's A because I think when it says the kings of the earth in Revelation 21, I think it's referring to the redeemed. Here you go, Mark. Simply because we're all going to be priests and kings, right? So the kings of the earth would be all the redeemed because we all serve in a position of being a king and a priest, right? All right? Okay, so we'll look at number 7. The river of life in Revelation 22:1, A, consists of a pure river that proceeds from the throne of God. B, is a God-given water source that will perpetuate life, similar to the tree of life. C, extends out from the very center of the New Jerusalem. D, all of the above, or E, none of the above? I think D, yep. Okay, 8, the tree of life in Revelation 22:2, A, possibly bears 12 different types of fruit every month. Some have suggested one fruit each of the 12 months, but as I'm reading the text more, it almost appears like it'll bear all 12 each month. Yeah, so I don't. It's just an opinion. Okay. B is positioned on both sides of the river of life. C is one of God's gifts to redeem humanity. D, all of the above. E, none of the above. Right. All right, number 9. The phrase, the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations in Revelation 22:2. A, discusses how leaves from the tree of life have healing properties. B, discusses how the redeemed will heal from the scars of sin through these leaves. C, discusses how the redeemed will grow up to the full physical stature of sinless humanity. D, all of the above, or E, none of the above? I would say D, yeah. Yep. Okay, and finally, number 10, the phrase, the Spirit and the bride say, come, most likely means, and I wasn't too creative on this, so I'm sorry. A, the Holy Spirit and the church are calling people to receive Christ. B, the Holy Spirit and the church are extending the invitation of salvation to all people. C, the Holy Spirit and the church are inviting people to prepare for Christ's return. D, all of the above. E, none of the above. Yeah. So that's pretty simple, right? See, if you took Revelation as a class from me, you'd all get A pluses, because I'm not really a hard tester. So here's the thing. Again, I think I've presented a lot of good material in this study on Revelation. There are some subjects that we've talked about that we could have a difference of opinion on, in a safe zone. That on issues that, when we speculate about the New Jerusalem or about some other aspects, we can want our minds in a sanctified fashion can kind of say, hey, I wonder if it's going to be like this. But I think overall there's been some pretty solid material here, and I've given you the outlines and I've given you the quizzes. So guess what? You can take all this stuff and you can share it with others. And you might even be able to come up with other quizzes and other tests. You know what I should have done? I should have made up a final exam. That's what I should have done. And Robert, you probably still could have done well even though you haven't been here for a lot of these studies. All right, so any thoughts that have been on your mind about Revelation that you might want to speak about? Debbie?
I have a question.
Sure.
Bible study on Sabbath afternoon. When God wipes away our tears and there's no more remembrance, why are we not remembering?
Well, I can present my opinion on that. I don't think that we will have no memory of this life, in my opinion. I think...
Will we have memories of loved ones that aren't there? Wouldn't that make us sad?
For the first 1,000 years.
Right, maybe after 1,000 years, will we not remember them, but we'll remember our life and our battle with sin or something, or what?
Well, I've wrestled with that, and I'm not exactly sure. But I'll give you my opinion. This is just an opinion. I think we're going to remember things from this life. And I think that we will... I got to be careful how I say this, but I do think we will feel the lack of people that aren't there that we wish were. Yet, one thing we have to understand is that our senses have been so desensitized and dulled down because of this sinful world. When we walk into that world, it's going to blow us away to the point to where our senses and our faculties are going to be so enamorized, or is that a word? Enamored, right? Enamored with just the glorious sinless society that we're in, that even though we'll remember those things, they won't really affect us maybe like they do here, because we're just going to be in this sinless environment and we're going to rejoice. And so, but I do think we're going to, Ellen White talks about in The Great Controversy how we will always have a keen sense of what our salvation has cost, because Jesus will have the marks of His crucifixion. And so we'll remember the sacrifice. But that's just my opinion. I'm hoping that I'll be there then we can have a talk there. Yeah, But that's just a thought. That Kathy, I don't know if you had anything to suggest or recommend.
It was similar, because if we are to never sin again, it's because we saw what sin did.
Yeah, and we remember that and don't want to go back there. Yeah. Yeah, and it's like, I think Isaiah reworded, was it in Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 66? He talks about how the former things will not be remembered nor come to mind. I don't think we'll be dwelling our minds on those things. Even though we'll remember, it won't be like dwelling. We won't be dwelling on it to where it consumes us and brings us down. But I do think because like you said, Kathy, the Great Controversy, the history of the Great Controversy is a lesson book for the universe. And it should never be forgotten, because then, you know how it is, if you forget, then you slip back into the old ways. But if you don't forget and you learn, you keep moving in a direction that is away from the bad lessons of what you've learned in the past. Right? So that's just my thought on that. Just a thought. Any other opinions? Joe?
I have a question about Revelation 14:12.
Sure.
Where it talks about the identity of saints as keeping the commandments of God and having the faith of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the identity where we have confirmation that we are biblical or spiritual Jews?
Yeah, let me... Oh no, he's grabbing the marker. Watch out. Yeah, there's a couple things I could say about that. You're talking about the commandments of God.
The faith of Jesus.
Okay. All right, so what are the commandments of God?
Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy.
So the Ten Commandments,
Yes.
basically, the Decalogue, right? I agree with you. I think it's the Decalogue, which is the Ten Commandments. All right. Now here's the question. What is the faith of Jesus? Because some people say, well, faith in Jesus. Well, that's not what the text says, the faith of Jesus. In other words, the same faith that Jesus had. All right, so what's that mean?
That's a good question.
Now, obviously, it involves faith in Jesus, but because to have the faith that Christ had, you got to have faith in Christ, right? But it means to demonstrate the same faith that Jesus had when he walked this earth. And what kind of faith did he have? An overcoming faith. You know how it says in Revelation 5, "Don't weep, John, for the Lion of the tribe of Judah has prevailed and is worthy to open the seven seals." You know what that word for prevailed is? Yes. And you know what the Greek word is? Nike. You want to know what the word Nike means and you wear the sneakers? Victory. Overcome. One who hears, overcomes, and prevails. Same Greek word in the seven churches. He who overcomes. Nikaio. Nike.
What about, is that the same prevail that way back that Jacob...
Absolutely. Same thing. That's what the word Israel means, Joe. The first time, a lot of times when we think of Israel, we think of the nation, and at one point in redemptive history it applied to the Jewish nation. But the first time the word Israel has ever been used in Scripture is in relationship to Jacob when he wrestled with Jesus that night and overcame. Despite a dislocated or broken hip or whatever it was, that he broke something there, and he hung on to Christ. And Jesus told him, listen, you are no longer Jacob, a supplanter, character. Now you are Israel, which means Prince of God and one who prevails, one who overcomes.
Okay, when it comes to your short answer,
I don't know anything like I don't know any short answers to anything. But anyway.
But when we're talking about wrestling with God, what does it specifically mean to wrestle with God so that we can overcome?
Well, here's the thing. When you look at the experience of Jacob, first of all, he committed a grievous sin against his brother and against his father and against God because he lied. He deceived his father into giving him Esau's birthright. Now, in fairness to Jacob, Esau really didn't want it. He didn't value it. And Esau... Yeah, exactly. But he tried to take... It's like Abraham. He tried to take matters into his own hands instead of letting God play it out the way it's... Yeah. Well, yeah, his mom. Well, you know what, though? Let me tell you something, Joe. Jacob never saw his mother again as a consequence of that sin. But see, Jacob's exile was what, 20 or 30 years? I know he was there at least 21 years, right? Maybe a little longer. And here he is marching back to his homeland All of a sudden, he gets word that Esau with 300 or 400 warriors or whatever it was marching on him. He's like, oh man, my whole family's dead now. And when he was on the other side of the brook that night praying, number one, he was praying for the assurance of God's forgiveness, because he was still carrying that guilt of those sins. Number two, he was named after his sin. He was a supplanter and a robber. That's what the word Jacob means. And number three, he was worried that because of his sins, that Esau and his warriors are going to fall on his family and wipe them out. So he was like, Lord, I need to know that you've forgiven me. I want to get victory. I want to put this sin behind me to the point to where my disposition even changes, to the point to where you can rename me. Because I don't want to be a robber and a supplanter. I want to be an overcomer. I want to be a prince of God. So he held on to Jesus despite the emotional wrestling he was going through, despite the spiritual wrestling he was going through, and despite the physical challenges he was going through. And he held on to Jesus and he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. That is a conquering faith. And when Jesus saw his faith, he said, you are forgiven, you are cleansed, you have victory, and I will rename you Israel, because you've had power with God and with men, and you have prevailed.
That's how we get a new name in heaven.
Exactly. And then the next morning, what does Jacob do? He goes out to Esau and he bows 7 times, and he gives him an offering from his flocks. And of course, God supernaturally visited Esau the night before and said, listen, don't lay a hand on that man. So Esau comes up, and he comes up in peace, and Jacob's a little hesitant, but then he sees Esau didn't have bad intentions. They exchanged pleasantries, and then he looked at Jacob's family. He goes, well, who are these? And he's like, these are the children that God has graciously given thy servant. And Esau saw Jacob's big family, and he saw that God had blessed Jacob, and they reconciled, and then they went their separate ways in peace.
So we can't give up. Like at a critical point, if Jacob
Right.
had given up, then he would have been lost for eternity.
Well, let me put it this way. In the great controversy, Ellen White uses the experience of Jacob as paralleling the experience of the remnant church at the end of time, just before the second advent of Christ. And she might be even talking about his experience when the plagues are falling. Even though their sins have been blotted out and they've been sealed, they still don't feel that way. And they wrestle with God and say, God, I'm going to hold on to you, and I'm not letting you go. No matter what happens to me, no matter if the sword comes down on my head from those that have the mark of the beast, so be it. I will lay down my life for your cause, but I will not let you go until you bless me.
Okay.
That's what I think it is. It's holding on to God's promises to the point to where you press God in a respectful, humble way to say, God, I need you to fulfill your promise for me personally. And holding on to that promise for your very life. That's what an overcoming faith is, I think.
Okay, what was that original verse in Revelation? That's what I was just looking for.
Which one?
14:12.
No, not 14:12. It's Revelation 5.
5, 5, and 6.
Okay.
Yeah, let's look at it. Revelation 5, 5, and 6. Remember John's weeping because no one's worthy to open the 7 seals, right? And then in Revelation 5, 5, and 6, it says, but one of the elders said to me, do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed, right? To open the scroll and to loose its 7 seals. And then he looks, and in the midst of the throne there's Jesus, right? With 7 horns and 7 eyes, right? That word for prevailed is Nikao, or Nike. It's the same word in all the 7 churches, those who overcome. He that overcometh, same word. But for some reason it's translated prevailed here instead of overcome. But it's still the same principle. So to have the faith of Jesus is to have an overcoming faith, right? Now, let's talk about righteousness by faith for a minute. What is sin? All right. 1 John 3:4. Now, some have said, and you've heard me say this many times, I'm going to say it again. Some people have told me, well, sin is separation from God. Well, that's not sin. Sin results in separation from God, but the essence of sinning is violating one or more of God's commandments. That's what sin is. All right. That's right. Now, let me ask you this. What is righteousness? Okay. How do we define righteousness?
Right doing.
And how is right doing defined? Keeping the commandments of God. And in fact, David said, Thy righteousness, O God, is an everlasting righteousness. Thy law is the truth. And he says in Psalm 119, 172, all your commandments are righteousness. So righteousness is defined by keeping the law of God. Sin is breaking the law of God. Sin and righteousness are opposites. So how do we keep the commandments of God? By faith in Jesus Christ. That is righteousness by faith. We keep God's commandments through our faith in Jesus Christ, who gives us the strength to overcome sin and keep and be faithful to God's commandments. That's what it means to be clothed with the righteousness of Christ, to be obedient to God's law by faith. It's very simple, right?
Righteousness by faith can also be described as obeying God, no matter what it looks like is going to happen.
Exactly. Though you slay me, said Job, yet will I trust in you and I will do what you say. Right? Now, let me share something else with you that's pretty interesting. How can I explain this? Let me get back to that. All right? Go ahead, Joe.
There is something, it's almost more than a coincidence about Revelation 5:5, is that reminds me that the servant who was given 5 talents earned five more. People earned interest on 5 more, and therefore he was an overcomer because the master said that he had done what he was supposed to.
Yep, exactly. He took that, what God had given him. It's a spiritual parallel. Take what God's given you and you multiply it.
That's what's interesting.
Yep. Now, here's what I was going to share with you, and I don't know how deep you want to get into this. I didn't want to leave you hanging, so I'll mention it. All right. So the word for righteousness in Greek, yes, Robert, it's either dikeo or it's dikaiosune. All right, depending on what. All right. You know how else this word is translated in Greek into English? Same word in Greek. That's why Ellen White could say, justification by faith is the third angel's message in verity. It's righteousness by faith. That's powerful. So, justification by faith and righteousness by faith are synonymous, and that's the third angel's message. Those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Right? And by the way, justification, that word simply means declared innocent. There's different ways to express this. It can mean declared innocent. It can mean made righteous by God. It can mean acquitted. But if you experience all these things in your heart when you're justified, the result is going to be obedience to God's commandments the way you live your life. And in fact, Luther, let me just get this in, Mark, and I'll get you. Luther wrestled with the whole Romans, for the righteousness of God is revealed. He's like, okay, what is the righteousness of God? Is it God is righteous, or God makes man righteous through faith? And he discovered, I think he resolved the question by saying it's both. God is both righteous, and God can declare faithful human beings righteous in His eyes because He's forgiven them, right? So Luther even wrestled with the concept of the righteousness of God, right? Mark, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, sanctification then is the result of that.
Yeah, I think that, and I've explained this, and this is just how I make sense of it. Justification produces sanctification, right? And sanctification preserves justification. Because we're not once justified, always justified. We got to endure in that experience. And the sanctified life preserves our justified state. If that makes sense. So yeah, there's a relationship between those two. It's beautiful how they both work together to bring salvation. Well, glorification, I think, happens. It's the end result when Jesus comes. We'll be glorified and immortalized. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's 5 after 8, and I didn't think we'd have enough material to even make it to 8, and we've managed to go over time. So we're gonna start with Hebrews. We talked about that, and Robert suggested we tie in some of the Old Testament sanctuary material. So we're going to try to see how we can get in, because I don't think it'd be very difficult to do that, because there's a lot of sanctuary allusions. Ezekiel, yeah. Well, I was reading through Jeremiah and Ezekiel today, because I've come up with an interesting theory on Daniel 11:40 to 45 that I think is very solvent. And so I've been looking into Ezekiel a lot, and Jeremiah and Ezekiel had a lot of prophecies condemning those that fell into idolatry in the region of Judah and surrounding nations, and he used Babylon as an instrument of judgment to smite all these nations and conquer them because of their idolatry. And there's a lot of those allusions in Daniel 11:40 to 45. You got Edom, Moab, Ammon, you got Libya, Ethiopia, Egypt. All those nations were conquered by ancient Babylon from the north.
Are you going to Las Vegas to that thing?
I am, and they've asked me to present 3 one-hour presentations there. Are you going?
Well, my daughter lives there, and I was thinking that would be a good
My
thing to do.
sister lives there. Can I go with you?
Hey, I can't pay your airline ticket, but if you want to go, you're welcome to come. Yeah, they've got a hotel all booked off and everything. It's going to be May 12 to 16, but I'm only going for the first few days. I can only go Monday and Tuesday because Jonathan, my son, graduates 8th grade on Wednesday, and that seminar goes through Thursday, and I can't miss his graduation. So John Whitcomb, one of the people on the Daniel 11 steering committee, has graciously allowed me to do my presentations on the first 2 days to get them out of the way so I can get them in before I have to go back. So basically what he's going to have me do is he's going to say, okay, Mark, there's the literal view of Daniel 11, there's the symbolic, typological view. You're a typology guy. We need you to stand up there and break down to us what principles you use to arrive at your conclusion. So I've come up with about 10 or 12 different principles of interpretation that lead me to conclude that the end of Daniel 11 is symbolic, it's not geographic. It's quote. And a lot of that is based on the Old Testament allusion of, because when you look at Revelation, for example, you've got allusions to the Exodus. You've got the drying up of the river Euphrates, which has an allusion to the Red Sea, as well as to the destruction of Babylon. You've got manna mentioned. You've got trumpets mentioned. You've got a lot of allusions to the Old Testament sanctuary, which came out in the Exodus. You've got the plagues, which happened during the Exodus. You've also got the fall of Jericho alluded to, because Babylon falls, collapses just like Jericho collapsed. You've also got an allusion to Babylon's collapse and Babylon's conquest of Israel in the book of Revelation. You've also got an allusion to the Battle of Megiddo, where Josiah was killed by Pharaoh Necho II of Egypt on the plain of Megiddo, which is a parallel to the Battle of Armageddon. Okay? So you've got a lot of allusions in Revelation pointing to Old Testament stories and experiences, but that apply spiritually to God's people at the end of time. And I think we see some of that in Daniel 11:40 to 45. They'll have that, they have this big wooden, what is it, like a 70-foot statue or something? Something like that? Yeah, and they've cut it out of wood and they've painted it, and they're going to have a tent meeting there that week, like an evangelistic effort on the Las Vegas Strip. So they're going to have me out. My wife's like, now you're going to be out on the sidewalk handing out flyers? She's like, do not listen to any overtures from any women of the night. I'm like, I won't, honey. Yes, that's right. I will not walk around the tree of knowledge. So we're going to go to Vegas and do that. And then I've also been asked to go up to Andrews in October. And it'll be on an off night from our well, the BRI, some of the people from BRI will be there, but there'll be other professors at Andrews and other people that are students of Daniel 11. That's going to be very intimidating because I'm not a Hebrew scholar like some of these people are. But, I wrestle with that because I think it's good to know the language a little bit because you can pull out nuances, but it's been translated into English, and with the Spirit's leading, I think we can understand it without being a language expert. I think we can read it and take the plain reading and say, okay, what does this mean? I think God's given us the tools to be able to understand it, even if they're not language experts. Now, I think these little nuances like this Nike, it's kind of a neat little detail to remember because then you're like, oh yeah, overcoming Nike. I wear Nike sneakers. That can be an overcoming, there's nice little things you can learn and that kind of stick in your mind, you can remember. But to be a real deep language expert, you don't need to be that way. In fact, there was one Daniel 11 speaker last October in the last meeting we had. He stood up and said, you have to know Hebrew to know Daniel 11. I wish he didn't say that. He allowed the Bible to be translated into our vernacular language, and we have enough English translations of the Bible that we can figure out what every text in the Bible is saying. We can get pretty close to what it's saying and figure it out. I think. Well, see, I was just going to say that. The reason why they put the Bible in Latin was to keep it from the common people, and that's and only the clergy to interpret it. And I think sometimes we have that mindset. We've got to be careful with that. The Bible can be understood by anyone who approaches it by faith with an honest heart to know what says the Lord. And God's Spirit will guide every sincere believer into truth if they come to the Scriptures like that. Yeah. Right. Well, here's the thing. What people, and I've said this before, I'll say it again since this is the comment. We have to remember that every English translation of the Bible is just that. It's a translation. It's a rendition. It's some committee's version of what the ancient language is saying. And that's why there's differences in translation. But I think that we're on safe ground when we compare translations. And let's not, some people depend on paraphrases. And I would say that if you read a paraphrase, that's fine. But don't base your doctrines on that. Stick to a solid translation like the King James, the New King James, one of these major English translations that's well established. Because then you're going to have an accurate reading of the text, pretty close to what the original language said, and the Spirit of God is going to guide you in understanding that, what you're studying. So, if you ask and if you're willing to follow, we got to approach the text with the attitude of, Lord, not only do I want to understand what it says, but I also want to have a heart that's willing to do what it says. Not to make it say what I want it to say, but to honestly say what you are saying to me, and how is this text claiming some aspect of my life that needs to be brought under the control of the Spirit. That, if we have that attitude, we're going to be scriptural and spiritual giants because God's Word will be the authority. And everything has to be based on the Word. All right. Well, I've kept you 12 minutes past 8 o'clock tonight, and thank you for being patient. So Hebrews 1 next week, right? It's going to be fun to go through Hebrews, and we're going to learn a lot about Christ, a lot about His priesthood, and a lot about how Jesus was the anti-typical fulfillment of a lot of the Old Testament people and concepts that these Old Testament experiences and people pointed to. It's going to be a good study. So let's pray. Father, thank you tonight for our discussion. Thank you for our study. And Lord, as we wrap up this great book of Revelation, we thank you for the comments that were made tonight, the discussions that were made tonight, that were engaged in tonight. Lord, we don't claim to have an exhaustive understanding of this book, but I believe that through this journey we've reacclimated our minds to it, and we're a little bit more knowledgeable, at least, about what Revelation talks about. And if nothing else, Lord, help us to heed the third angel's message. Help us to have the faith of Jesus, your faith, and help us by your faith to keep the commandments of God. And Lord, if we can have that experience, then all the other things will fall into place. So just help us to be faithful. Help us to study. And as we begin a new journey next week in a new book, may we continue to be blessed with nuggets and blessings from you in understanding the Scripture. And may our lives be changed as a result of that understanding. And we also pray tonight that you'll watch over us as we travel home, that you'll be with us, that you'll protect us, and that you'll watch over our families. This we ask in Jesus' name.